Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida Fair Tax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, January 24th, 2020. Should we be taxing corporations? A corporation is an entity created by law which is allowed to operate within certain guidelines. A corporation like Amazon has no life other than as a vehicle for the shareholders, its owners, to participate in a business enterprise. Now, in the media, we hear that Amazon made over $10 billion in profit on $239 billion in revenue. The media also hammers away at the fact that Amazon will pay no income tax on that massive profit. Now, no one is claiming that Amazon illegally evaded paying taxes that were rightfully due. They're merely saying that there's something wrong with a system that lets that happen. These critics ignore the fact that since 1995, Amazon consistently lost money and that they only became profitable in the last few years. But now that Amazon is turning a profit, they're proclaiming loud and long that it's wrong for them not to pay any income tax. Now, while it's true that Jeff Bezos and his ex-wife own 16% of Amazon shares, the majority of Amazon shares are owned directly or indirectly by many of us. CNN Business published the following information. Institutional investors hold a majority ownership of Amazon through the 58.15% of the outstanding shares that they control. Mutual funds hold 32.25%. Other institutional investors hold 25.9%. Now, while Jeff Bezos is the founder of Amazon and has amassed a $40 billion fortune, he doesn't control the company. Like every other corporation, Amazon shareholders control the company by a simple majority vote. If Mr. Bezos upsets 50.1% of the shareholders, he will be removed and replaced. Investors purchase stock for two reasons. They hope the price of the stock will increase, and they hope that the company will pay them dividends each year. Shareholders of corporations want these corporations to use the profits they make in one of several ways: pay down corporate debt, expand production, acquire other companies that will add to the company's profitability, or distribute some or all of its profits to the shareholders in the form of dividends. Now, just who would be affected by taxing Amazon? Well, that would be the shareholders. If Amazon paid income tax at the 21% corporate rate, they would owe Uncle Sam $2.1 billion, leaving $7.9 billion in the corporation. Now, assuming that Amazon did not need to use the remaining $7.9 billion to pay down debt, expand production, or make acquisitions, they could declare a dividend and distribute that $7.9 billion to its shareholders. The shareholders would then pay individual income tax on the dividends they received. Assuming an average rate of 20%, then that $7.9 billion would generate an additional $1.58 billion in individual income taxes. This means that investors in Amazon would receive only 59% of the amount that Amazon earned. Now, while this is not an incorrect result given the present law, it does show how shareholders who receive dividends are only receiving between 50 and 60% of a corporation's total earnings. Now, if Amazon chose not to distribute their profit but used it for their business, this would presumably result in an increase in the value of its stock. Now, many investors would actually prefer this because if their Amazon shares increase in value, then they pay tax at capital gains rates, which are about half the rate levied on ordinary income. Of course, if Amazon had the full $10 billion to use and not just the $7.9 billion, and they used it wisely, their stock value would increase even more. Now, these examples illustrate that a corporate tax levied against Amazon would actually be paid directly or indirectly by the shareholders. Again, a corporation is really just its shareholders doing business under a corporate name, and many of us, directly or indirectly, are Amazon shareholders. Now let's look at the change the fair tax would make. Once the fair tax is enacted, Amazon and other corporations would have no corporate income tax to pay, and its owners would have no personal income tax to pay. If the $10 billion earned by Amazon was distributed to the shareholders, they would receive the entire $10 billion, and then they would pay the fair tax only on the amounts that they used to purchase new goods and retail services. Instead of spending an enormous amount of time and resources trying to find ways to reduce their tax liability, corporations would be free to make the best decisions for their businesses and their shareholders. A corporation would no longer keep money it doesn't need for foreign operations offshore because it could bring that money back to the U.S. and pay no tax on it. Large corporations based in other countries are also controlled by their shareholders, and their officers would be fired if they didn't move their corporations to the U.S. and thus save the foreign taxes they would otherwise pay. As one of the early fair tax congressional supporters used to say, "Pass the fair tax, and that great sucking sound you hear will be all of the assets leaving foreign countries and rushing to the United States." In conclusion, most basic concepts are really pretty simple. Keep your word is a simple concept. You do what you say you will do. Now, this simple concept has been greatly modified by some people. They say that keeping your word is not an absolute, and that by the time they list all the exceptions, the simple concept no longer means the same thing. Taxation is a simple concept. It's the government extracting the money it needs to operate from the people it governs. If the purpose of the tax is just to fund government operations, it can be a very simple tax. However, if the purpose is for revenue, profit to the ruling class, and control of the people, then it becomes a lot more complicated. The ruling class has found that taxes are a good way to punish those who disagree with them and to reward those who obey and pay tribute to the ruling class. The corporate income tax is a great example of this. Instead of telling corporate leaders that their purpose is to produce great products that will allow a lot of money to be passed to their shareholders, the ruling class says, the purpose of the corporate income tax is not just to collect revenue for the government, but for us to control what you do and to ensure that you operate in a way that we think is best. And even though we've never run a business any bigger than a lemonade stand, we do know best. If you make money, we'll tax it. First at the corporate level and then again at the shareholder level. We will reward you not for making better products, but by turning your business operations into something that follows our complicated rules. We will also reward you if you pay us for special benefits that can make your operations more profitable than other businesses, even if your products are not as good. And if you pay us enough, we will actually make more rules and regulations so that your smaller competitors can't comply, and then you can acquire them for much less than they're actually worth. Ultimately, all of us understand that the more people there are creating and receiving income, the more an economy will grow. The more people have, the more they can use for consumption, and the better everyone's lives will be. No one likes being dependent on someone else. We all like the ability to direct our own lives. Independent people who can provide their own support are much less likely to value or need the ruling class and their minions. If the purpose of taxation is to fund what's needed for the public good, then why not collect the tax in the simplest way that does the least amount of damage to the economy? Like Willie Sutton said when he was asked why he robbed banks. His answer? Well, that's where the money is. The ruling class loves the income payroll tax system for the same reason. There's an immense amount of money to be made from selling tax favors to corporations who have the money to pay for them. The people who are profiting from the system are not the people who are creating products that enhance our lives, but are parasites living off our efforts. To continue to survive, these parasites need to keep the present income payroll tax system in place. Now, isn't it time to remove the parasites and go to a sane tax system? If you agree, then go to fairtax.org and join us. Isn't it time that we demand the solution that benefits everyone? Pass the fair tax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at fairtax.org.